Minion shows an example of what NASA presents as a formula of what's needed to support human life in space per day. And he shows a list of 1 kilogram of oxygen, zero point 0.5 kilograms dry food, 1 kilogram of whole food, 4 kilograms of drinking water, and 26 kilograms of wash water. Much stated, and SpaceX flight duration to Mars will range from 80 to 120 days. Minion shows further math in his post and comes up with a figure of 106,800 kilograms or 117 tons, with a cargo capacity of 450 tons. Now add supplies for a 600-day mission to that payload. What are your thoughts on that, Jarrah?
Well, I think people to Mars at a time is a bit far off at this stage, especially without an adequate shield. His rocket the actual finished version of the rocket is proposing to lift about 550 tons in the expendable motor, but of course he's proposing to reuse the rocket, so it cuts the Earth orbit payload down to about 300 tons. He's proposing to send the Mars Colonial Transport System into orbit, then send up a second rocket with all the propellant in for the mission. Whether or not that has enough cargo and supplies is anyone's guess at this stage, but of course there have been alternative proposals. One idea has been to actually send cargo missions there to the surface of Mars in advance. So you would have all your cargo, all your supplies waiting for you when you got to the surface, and so then you would have to worry about this taking the cargo that would be required for the journey to there. But another idea is to actually send vegan astronauts on the trip. So basically, that way is you would have a actual greenhouse aboard your spacecraft, and presumably you would set one up on the surface of Mars so that you would be able to grow your own food on the trip to Mars. You'd be growing like fruit and vegetables. You'd be surviving on those for the duration of the trip. And of course, when you're on the surface, you'd be growing your own food on the surface in this greenhouse that you've set up. That's one of the reasons why they're preparing proposals to actually send vegan astronauts aboard rather than meat eaters. So if you're considering traveling to Mars, you might want to consider turning vegetarian. But like I said, if it's still a pipe dream unless they can find a way to solve the radiation hazard. I know I'm starting to sound like a bit of a broken record here, but that's literally the main stumbling block is you don't have the right shield. You're not going to be going anywhere.
Well, that's true. There's talk of magnetic shielding going on. I've looked into the V2 suit in itself. Not being able to find much on radiation protection, although looking into nano carbon fiber with loaded electropolymers, I believe, but not knowing. That's still in testing stage in itself. But when we speak of the crew and the amount of people, you're going to obviously need a medical facility. I understand you need protection on the radiation, but even to consider the cargo and what should be on board, that adds weight. I mean, I don't know how many, the Z2 suits are 143 pounds each. If you got a crew of 100, do you need 100 suits in case of emergency? Is all this considered?
Well, obviously you would need 100 suits if you're going to be sending 100 people to the surface. But of course, you know, we have there's been proposals for alternative means of shielding and stuff like the artificial magnetic fields, or electrifying the outer walls of the spacecraft to create an electrostatic charge and stuff. There's been various pros and cons with it. One fear with the magnetic field proposal is the problem that the field itself might actually pose a hazard to the astronauts themselves. I don't remember the actual numbers of the field that they would be required and stuff, but a colleague of the astrophysicist Eugene Parker, he stuck his head in the field of I think it was a 0.5 Tesla magnetic field, and it created a headaches and a sort of acidic taste in his mouth. And so, which begs the question: what's it going to be like with a much more powerful magnetic field? And of course, when it comes to electrostatic shielding, they would have to electrify the outer walls to something like 10 billion volts, and well, even the largest Van de Graaff generator can't generate electricity like that. And another problem too is, well, as the song goes, opposites attract. You know, if you electrify the outer walls, give it a positive charge, you'll repel away all the protons, because like repels like, but the electrons, the negative charge electrons, they would be drawn in by the magnetic field. I haven't looked into the polymers that you mentioned, but I do know that they've actually used polyethylene on the ISS. Polyethylene is sometimes proposed because it's similar in density to water, but again, it brings back to the point: you would need several meters of this stuff to offer adequate protection. In regards to supplies for medical things, obviously you would need to send doctors. You would need to send even caterers, really, for the restaurants that he's proposing to have on this essentially this gigantic space cruise thing. But obviously that will add to the weight, and there has been extended stays on the ISS. I don't recall the actual numbers, but people have actually lived in space aboard the ISS for several hundreds of days at a time. And I'm not sure how. I don't remember the exact how flies have been on those extended stay tests. And also there's been stays, but there's been also stays on the Earth for 100 days inside sealed chambers. The amount of time, the amount of isolation that a person would be able to sustain, because it's not just physical and things that you have to worry about. It's also your psychological abilities to withstand being confined within these chambers for about 500 days at a time. And the ISS is constantly brought up as an example that humans can survive long duration flights, because as your comparable amounts of time that you would on a trip to Mars, it's in an environment that is much less hazardous than what you experience, because it's below the Van Allen belt. It's got protection from the Earth's magnetic field, and you're not going to have that luxury on a flight to Mars. So that's one of the reasons why people have become so cavalier about the radiation hazard.
Say the food. Minion also stated NASA really hasn't developed a nutritional strategy for a mission lasting over 3 years. ISS and NASA sustains crew with prepackaged food supplemented with food deliveries periodically. Wouldn't there be a disposal issue associated with the current food packaging?
Well, that leads to another proposal of what some people have proposed to do with the packets. Some people have actually. There's one of the Inspiration Mars team, which has been proposed by Dennis Tito. He's actually been proposing. I mentioned earlier that he had planned on using bags of water to shield against the radiation. One. He's also been proposing to use your packages, your leftover packages, essentially to put that amongst all the bags of water and stuff like that. We can use that as extra shielding. We need the bags of water to drink out of. Okay, we've got an empty bag now. I need to take a dump. Okay, take a dump in the bag, put it back there with the others, and basically just keep using all your waste products really to add to the radiation shield. Of course, it's not going to work anyways because it's not thick enough. But that's a serious concern that has been brought up. Do you take disposable things? Do you reuse the waste products, be it human waste or be it artificial waste or whatever? Do you use that as part of your things? Do you just jettison it off into space? On the ISS, they actually have a storage tank for urine, and obviously once that tank fills up, they just vent it off into space, really. And so that's an issue that's obviously being debated. Do we jettison the waste? Do we hang on to it, use it as an additional shield? It's I imagine they would probably try crossing that bridge closer when they get to it, but it is indeed a very serious topic that's considered. What do we do with the waste products?
Yeah, it's interesting. I never envisioned them plastering the walls with their shat, so to say. Um, and talking about the influences on the human body, you mentioned, I've read, just the adaptation of the long term in space and zero grav. You have the liquid in your body itself redistributing, and there's physical changes like eyesight and the flattening of eyes or swollen optics. I've read.
Yes, there's all kinds of psychological things. One, of course, is the eyes. They can actually you actually start to lose um, focus of your eyes because of the reduction of gravity, or rather no gravity, I should say. And of course, on Earth, obviously, we're used to gravity pulling us down when we, for example, the bladder, for example. This was actually realized later on during the flight of John Glenn, God rest his soul at this stage. I'm an atheist, mind you, but seriously, Godspeed, John Glenn. He died yesterday, so moments silence to him. When he flew his Mercury flight, they found that he actually produced more urine than they were expecting, because when you're on Earth and the urine accumulates in your bladder, it actually causes sensitivity at the valve, where obviously which leads into your urethra, which it sends signals to your brain that you need to take a leak. But obviously, because he has no gravity, the urine in his bladder literally managed to just accumulate much higher, basically float around until it inflated to much larger than normal. So he ended up producing much more urine than they had anticipated. So that's one of the effects that the lack of gravity has. You actually have to adjust to those sorts of things, because you take gravity out of the equation, and suddenly your world is literally turned upside down.
Yeah, it's amazing. Some of the effects that are known of, and it goes beyond that, goes into the brain and stuff, and all the facilities and the money spent, and testing and experiments, and they're really, to be honest, unsure still to this day, of what really will happen in deep space to the humans. With that, Othelzer's question, and he simply states, do you think there's enough time or will to establish man in space before the collapse of man and technology being hitting?
Well, it's essential really that we establish humankind as a multi-planetary species. Whether you can do it or not obviously depends on whether you can get the right shielding. I know I'm sounding like a broken record now, but really that's what it all comes down to. The problem is that no one has found the time no one's put the serious effort into trying to solve the hazard. SpaceX came closer really because they have a rocket that could potentially lift the shield that is required. But obviously he doesn't seem to realize that what he's proposing, just point the bulky end of the craft, just point the column of water at the sun, that'll be good. He doesn't seem to realize that that's not going to work. And whether we can solve these problems before mankind destroys itself really is, we can only hope and pray really. It's really probably going to be, it's obviously now Donald Trump has been elected and has employed all kinds of, or rather nominated all kinds of crazy people for his campaign, like a bloody climate change denier as the head of the Environmental Protection Agency. That's just crazy. It's going to lead to all kinds of crazy shit and probably derailment of humankind as it is. So it's the sooner we can the equipment that we need to make humankind a multiplanetary, the better, really, because the world is just going to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah, interesting. The world, it changes, dynasties come and go. Uh, Now, speaking of space radiation in itself, I mean, and pointing the ass of the rocket towards the sun, as you know, and I know, really isn't sufficient. We know this by simply looking at all the magnetic field lines throughout the universe and particles and energy that flow through those in themselves. I don't know how you could avoid uh, taking a trajectory and slingshotting or whatever. You're going to be crossing magnetic field paths and or galactic radiation constantly. So it's hard for me to understand why Musk himself doesn't perceive this as an issue. So the next question is from Data.